It's going to be hosted by Lloyd Mitchel. Lloyd is our Vice President of Technology at SafeNet AT. He's got over 25 years of experience in developing security products at SafeNet, actually, and then came over to SafeNet AT when we formed in 2015. Goes back to the days of little WAN encryptors, I think, dial-up encryptors. So lots of experience. And then we're going to have a panel of 3 that Lloyd will introduce. This would really be good to be an interactive. So we're hoping to get some views from our panelists, but also take a lot of questions, talk about the tech trends, what tech trends you guys are seeing in industry, both the resellers and our government attendees that are here. And also some of the challenges, right? So we know there's a lot of challenges implementing new technologies and leading technologies, from policy to standards to testing and AOT. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lloyd, and we'll get this session started.
Thanks, Kirk. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me all right. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists. Let me start with Chris Fedde. He's the CEO currently of Bandura Cyber. He's served as the Chief Executive Officer for several cybersecurity companies, including Hexus Solutions, SafeNet, and a few others. I've known Chris going back to the mid-90s, I guess. So he's been around the block. He's got a lot of experience. Hopefully we'll have a very lively discussion with his help. Stan Mesceda on the far end there. He's the high-speed encryption product manager for Thales. Stan's very experienced security professional. He's had various roles in engineering and operations and program management. He's been working for over the past 2 decades, and he's brought a variety of data protection solutions to market. Jay Hoffmeier on the end closest to me. He's a senior consultant with Microsoft. He specialized in PKI and smart cards, cryptography, and identity. He has close to 50 years in IT and holds a BS and an MS in computer science. He has over 20 years in the PKI field and has helped design and deploy major PKI systems for financial institutions. We'll start this off. Welcome, guys. Thank you for your participation. So when I was presented with this opportunity, they kind of said, well, let's talk about tech trends. There were some suggestions of some different topics, but I kind of wanted to whittle it down. I think the brochure has a few different areas. I wanted to whittle it down to a few things. The things that helped me to choose what to talk about. Something I'm interested in. There's a lot of tech trends. There's lots going on in the industry. I was having a conversation with one of the presenters earlier, saying, how do you keep up? How do you focus on a thing? It's really hard. There's a lot out there. So I wanted to talk today about some things that I'm interested in, and something that's a real problem. Julian had a really great presentation, and he kind of set up some softballs for me with the quantum and IoT, and those are kind of 2 of the areas I want to dig into. And I wanted the topic to be something we can really have a fruitful discussion on. These guys have a lot of experience in various different segments of security, and each one has a unique perspective, as do all of you, and I think we'll have a good discussion there. So with that, let's dig into quantum first. So as Julian kind of pointed out, Google recently in the last couple of weeks announced this quantum supremacy. And much like his reaction, I kind of thought of like, that's a new Star Wars movie, the Quantum Menace or something like that. But it's not. And so what they basically said, the leaked paper, sort of alluded to the fact that they've created this computer that can do some random generation stuff. So basically it can do random proofs in about 3 minutes. And the equivalent in a classic computer, they estimated it's a 10,000 year operation. So that's a big step in the world of quantum. It's a big sort of question mark or scary thing for cryptography. And as Julian kind of pointed out, it seems that right now quantum is really if you boil it down, about breaking asymmetric cryptography. Right? There's not a lot of utility, not a lot of other uses for it right now, but that's the big scary thing. So I kind of want to turn it over to the panel to talk about quantum, how it relates to the market, how it relates to security, what they're seeing in their different areas and expertise, and what they're hearing from their customers, what they're hearing from the market, and some things that maybe they are or we are needing to do to prepare and get ourselves ready for the quantum menace, if you will. So I'll start with Chris. So do you want to talk a little bit about if you feel that this threat is a real one, right? You know, Google sort of alluded to this, and it's a leaked paper, and they haven't really submitted it formally. But is it a real threat? And if so, you know, are you hearing anything in your space about what people are concerned with? And if you are, what's your suggestions or advice to them, things they should be doing?
Well, first I want to compliment you. The title of the panel is Getting Control of Trends, and you start with quantum. I happily join the ranks of people that don't actually get the nuts and bolts of it, even though I happen to graduate with a degree in physics, a second degree in physics. Although that was long enough ago that I'm not sure anything I learned is actually true anymore. But to answer your question, I think the way I look at it, and I look at it from both sides of the table. I've sold about every kind of security product there is to enterprises, and I've sat across the table as a CEO a number of times listening to people sell. So I think the important thing right now is for both sides of the table to understand that a couple things. One is it's something that came about from the computing side, right? It wasn't developed to crack codes. It came about from the computing side, which means that there's other things that'll come out of that same thing. So as it matures as a technology, as it becomes reality, even if it is in a 20-year time frame, solutions will come with the problems, right? And so we're looking at that. And so for the time being, all you can do is look at what sorts of things are made vulnerable by quantum computing. And as Julian pointed out, there's really a finite number of things right now that are rendered vulnerable. Even if they are available today, they tend to be things that need factorization and that sort of thing. So as long as you understand what is going to be rendered vulnerable and what isn't, so you can be planning for it, that's about all you can do, because I have not felt any pressure to address quantum threats nor provide quantum solutions. I think people tend to look at it as if it is 10 years out, it's beyond career relevance, right? And unfortunately, most of the people in our industry do look at it to some extent that way. So I think that's kind of how we look at it. There's not a lot we need to do now, but let's be aware of which particular things would be rendered vulnerable as it matures, and then be on the lookout for solutions that can be feathered in instead of large-scale forklift changes. So I think that's how they're looking at it. But to answer your specific question, I'm not feeling a lot of pressure to do much about it, because I think they look at it as far enough out that there's not anything meaningful they need to do.
Right, and I think that's probably true, and we see that in some other areas as well. You know, it's one of those, it's a long-range problem. People are concerned with near-term solutions. And specifically, and the next question is related to Jay's expertise. You know, so right now, one of the things I've heard, and the big concern is with quantum, you know, I've got data that I've encrypted, symmetric or asymmetric keys, and it's warehoused. And at some point, whether that's me or that, at some point, you know, when quantum becomes a real thing, that data that's warehoused will be vulnerable. Right? The keys can be cracked and retrieve that stuff, and now something I've got a 5 to 10 year retention policy on is at risk. So what do I do today? So talking about key management. So Jay, and your expertise there, key management and PKI. PKI today is largely, you know, RSA and ECDSA, asymmetric cryptography. So are you hearing anything from your customers in the Microsoft space that are concerns around that? And what, if any, advice do you have for them? Maybe it's along the same lines if it's a long-range problem, but it's something that we have to address today because those data retention policies are long-running.
That's correct. What I'm hearing is mostly coming out of places like NSA and NIST. Because when you look at a PKI, you're not looking at something, one of us is buzzing. You're not looking at something that is only going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. Routes are typically 20, 30, 40 years in length, depending on the algorithm and that. NSA not recently, about 18 months ago, came out and says 2048 in quantum is going to be dead. They're recommending today that everything be above 4,000 bits for RSA keys. Not necessarily for users, but at least for CAs. ECC, even ECC 256 is susceptible to quantum in the future. So if you're building an ECC PKI, go with 384 or 521. Same thing with SHA-2. Even SHA-256 is vulnerable. We have, from that, most of my customers, I have to look at not what the trends are, but what are going to be the trends and who definitely is the threat. Google may have done something, but we can bet the Chinese and the Russians and that are probably well ahead of other people. And if they can turn around using the encryption, using quantum to break our symmetric or even our asymmetric to get the symmetric keys, that's a problem. Key management is definitely needed. Anybody who's generated an encryption key, you better have key management if you want to get to that data years from now. And as he was saying, it's a long-term goal. PII data in the government has to be encrypted and kept for life of the individual plus X number of years. And I think that's 20 years. That's a long time for an infant. You're looking at 100 plus years. You don't want to sit there and do that with a AES 256 key wrapped in a RSA 2048-bit key, or even signed with SHA-1, because it can be broken. So my customers ask me, what are we going to do for the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road? So they're asking. They're starting to ask now. And it's becoming a problem, but it's not immediate like Chris was saying. But for building PKIs, I have to look 20, 30 years down the road. And granted, I won't be there to solve the problem in 30 years.
Right. So when you're suggesting that to your customers and sort of talking them through this long lifetime of their data and the importance of key management, do you get any pushback? I mean, they're saying, it's a 20-year problem, and you're telling me I've got to do something today.
From the standpoint of setting up the PKIs, not really any push at. From the standpoint of key management systems, yes, because they're looking at the expense of a key management system like SafeNet does and a few others. Those can get expensive. Right. And then they need expensive equipment, HSMs behind them to protect the key. And with the cloud the way it is today, there is a lot of, in Azure, in AWS, in Google, any of the clouds, there's a lot of encryption keys that are being generated where the agencies don't have backups of the keys. Right. All those keys should be generated in a key management system on-prem and shipped up. And put in the cloud. Nothing should be generated directly in the cloud. Even in dedicated HSMs in the cloud and things like that. That's where the pushback's coming from, because I'm recommending doing this to protect those keys for 20, 30, 40 years. Plus, if you got an AWS and you decide 5 years from now, oh, Azure's cheaper, how are you going to get those keys back? Right. And who has those keys, and who can actually decrypt it? Once you put it up there, you don't know who has the key. But at least if you have a key here, you know that nobody's changing. Nobody's using a key and saying, we're using key B, but here's key A. This is the one we're really using. So you get the bring your own key or hold your own key. Those are the important things, even for PKI that's being built up in the cloud.
Okay. So the next question is for Stan. So you're closer to product, right? Product manager for HSE, high-speed encryption. So with the quantum threat looming and these different algorithms that NIST is working through, and there's some sort of front runners that they believe might be the set that they pick, are you seeing any opportunities from a customer perspective to address quantum, and if so, how are you doing that?
Yeah, hopefully I can get my, can everybody hear me now? Okay, so I guess my mic, I'm having mic problems on stage here, but yeah, from a quantum side, I mean, ironically, I announced quantum supremacy a week before Google, but no one picked it up, so. No, I mean, we're in this game where everybody's leapfrogging each other, right? One after the next, and you know, so I kind of agree with what a lot's been said on the panel, a lot with Julian said, you know, except that I am mining my own qubits and, you know, generating bitcoins in my basement. But beyond that, it's, everybody keeps leapfrogging each other, right? And it's coming faster than we ever thought. So when I first started talking about this 3 or 4 years ago in our presentation, it was strictly thought leadership. And our targets were 20 to 25 years out, right? No one thinks that's the case anymore, right? Now everybody's talking about 5 to 10 years. And the question is, what are the risks and what are we using it for? And I agree with the comments that were made on the panel that once you get, you know, private investment, so to speak, why is Google and why are IBM and the Chinese and Russia and America, why is everyone putting so much money into this, right? To solve specific problems. And one of them is to crack cryptography. So we can sit on one side and yes, my neighbor's son is not going to have a QX Apple 2500 breaking into my communications. It's not a threat to me, but to us as a nation, as a country, as a world, right, that there's a threat to everyone out there because we're trying to solve a very specific problem. So going back to the timeline of data and how it's being siphoned off of networks, and we know that's happening. So you start putting the pieces together and it makes a lot of sense. And where we're seeing interest on the product side and what people are starting to do is two things. One is you have to start upgrading your infrastructure now. Because one thing we often talk about is like time to quantum. And we can all take a guess and we can all throw something in a hat and one of us is going to be right, but no one knows. The problem is, and we've heard this reference, you know, kind of comparing it to Y2K. Right? Y2K countdown came, we spent $1 billion on it to be compliant, to make things happen. But we knew when Y2K was going to happen. 2000, right? That's when it was going to happen. So we could decide as organizations and as nations when we were going to throw our money into it and engineer it. Y2Q, or when quantum hits, we don't know when it's going to happen. And all that data, as Jay said, is now vulnerable. All those key sets are now, everything's now vulnerable, right? So where we're seeing is we're seeing requests on the infrastructure side, and we're seeing requests for that crypto agility. So what you're going to need to do is start standing up your infrastructure now to protect yourself in the future for data that's relevant 20 to 25 years from now, because it will be vulnerable, right? Because we are siphoning off the lines and we are investing around the globe billions of dollars in quantum. So it's coming, shortening on both ends, as Julian said, the time to happen. And when it hits, we're going to scramble because NSA and NIST are going to say we're out of compliance. And then, that's when the real problem is. And that's when the billions of dollars gets trying to get up to compliance and trying to catch up. But guess what? It's too late, right? It's absolutely too late because all the data's out there. The quantum computer exists now that's going to crack. And I don't know if it's going to be the Russians or the Americans or the Chinese or who, but it's going to be out there. We're going to be vulnerable and everyone can possibly go into a state of panic. Now, if we have solutions in place that are already doing quantum protection, we start adopting the algorithms that we think are safe. Julian put up a nice list of those before that are the early runners.